Thank you, and I hope we are all past the post-lunch energy tar pits that tend to settle in. So as Thane said, I want to talk about three engines of growth that the STM and scholarly publishing industry has really used for the last decade and a half. And if you kind of talk to publishers about what their principal activities have been over the last 15 years, it usually boils down to some aspect of the following three things. The first thing is the site license. And the site license was a concept that borrowed from the software industry early on in the late 1990s, and has been used to really propagate journals and journal sales in institutional sales. And I'll show some statistics later about the decline of individual sales over the last 50 years or so, but certainly the last 15 years, that decline has even accelerated. And the answer that the industry has had has really been the site license. I think of it as the industry's Disney moments. There was this moment in the 80s, around 1980, when the VCR really started taking off. And somebody at Disney woke up and sort of said, hey, you know what, we have all these classic films in the can. All we have to do is put them on VHS tapes, and we're going to mince, millions, billions, as it turns out. So there's this instance where, this industry said, hey, there's this new thing called the internet, and we've had this decline in individual sales going on for decades. Maybe there's something we can do about it. The next thing that came along shortly after the site license, of course, was what's known as the big deal. The big deal was actually invented by a person who is not in this room, but is certainly in this building today, who is Jan Veltrop, who at the time was at Academic Press, and he came up with the concept of the big deal, and the rest, of course, is history. And then the third thing is global expansion. So going back 15, 20 years, most publishers did not have extensive sales in China and India and South America and in the Middle East. And since that time, most publishers now have extensive sales in those areas, as well as Eastern Europe and regions far and near. Global expansion has been a huge endeavor of the industry for a decade and a half. The big question, though, is if we're at the end of the line. This is a term that, or a term that could also be used here would be peak subscription, which is a topic I wrote about last year. And really what I mean by peak subscription, or the end of the line, is not that the big deal is going to go away. And it's not that the site licenses will go away. But there's really nowhere new to sell to, right? There's no new continent that is ripe for selling site licenses into. They're not minting new institutions at the rate that will keep growth going the way that it has been for the last 15 years in anywhere. They're not creating new universities, new hospitals at a rate that would allow that growth to continue. And at the institutions that do exist, as we all know, there is budgetary pressure to limit the extent to which prices can go up. So we're starting to see a bit of an end game for the big deal, with the largest institutions now positioning themselves for having the biggest of the big deals, the bigger deal. And whoever has the bigger deal will continue to see some growth at the expense, most likely, of those without the bigger deal who have merely big deals or medium deals. So for those that don't have the biggest deal, the big question is what will be the engines of growth, the key drivers, as Thane said, going forward over the next 15 years. Can we even say 15 years? Might be 5 years, and then we'll need new drivers of growth. It's a fast-changing market. Oh, sure. Thank you. Is that better? Am I close to the microphone? Thank you. So just generally speaking, not even talking about our industry, there's really only 3 general approaches to growth. You can either increase your prices, you can sell your products or services to more and different people. This is the market expansion plan, selling into China or whatever. And then there's selling new products and services. So we've done the first one. We can cross that off the list. We've raised prices. We've optimized prices. We've played with deals and made them bigger and bigger. And that's been done. And we've sold products to more and different people. So we can cross that off the list. So that leaves us with selling new products and services. And let's talk just a little bit about some ways in which that can be parsed a little bit further. So one way in which we can sell additional goods and services is through the reestablishment of an individual or end user market. And I say reestablishment as there once was a robust individual marketplace in this industry. There was a great article published in the current issue of Learned Publishing, to which you should all have access as SSP members. And it's by Carol Tenneper and Don King and some co-authors. And Don and Carol, for those of you who are not aware of their work, have been working together for 30 years and have had this longitudinal study going back decades looking at reading patterns within the industry. And they look at all sorts of measures of reading. And one of the things that they track are the use of individual as opposed to institutional subscriptions. And so this quote stood out. So they update this every few years, and this is the most recent refresh. 1977, 60% of article readings came from personal subscriptions, 1977. By 1984, that had fallen to 35%. And by 2012, it was 18%. You can bet by today it's less than that. So we went from 60% of readings within the academic setting coming from personal subscriptions down to 18% and headed much lower. That is a precipitous decline. Joe is going to talk a lot more about this. I'm just kind of touching on this topic at a high level. Now, I don't mean to suggest that there is going to be a reawakening of the institutional or the individual market for individual journal subscriptions. I don't think there's going to be a big rush for individual users to start subscribing to journals. So that's not necessarily what I'm talking about in terms of reawakening or reestablishing the individual market. What I'm talking about is establishing new products and services for the individual market. So some examples of this are things like Figshare. So Figshare is largely targeted at the individual market. They certainly have an institutional product as well, but their primary customer is the individual. Papers is another example. Currently owned by Springer, originally a startup. Again, there are certainly an institutional product here, but it's primarily targeted at the individual user. Overleaf is another example of this. an authoring tool that's, again, small startup now I don't know if it's owned by or invested in by Digital Science. And just another example of a product is from New England Journal of Medicine, Knowledge Plus, which is a maintenance and certification product, again, targeted at the individual. So these are all products that are targeted at the individual. There are many, many more. And some of these may or may not be the right fit for your organizations. But the point is that we're starting to see a lot more activity in the individual space. And again, Joe Esposito is going to talk a lot more about this. The question each organization needs to ask is really, what will your end users spend more time with? What are they willing to exchange their time for? What are they willing to exchange their, and you could build information, that you could imagine that there could be some products that are based on, say, advertising because they're spending a lot of time with your product. The other would be, what are they willing to exchange information for? And this information could then be used in data products or other sort of products based on the information, either personal information, professional information, other data, whatever they're willing to provide. And then, of course, what are they willing to pay for? So you could imagine there are different categories of products that your organization could come up with based on the answers to these questions. The second category of growth driver that I want to talk about is the development of entirely new business models. So one of the reasons, of course, that publishers are so interested in gold open access journals is because it's a new business model, and it taps revenues that are from not the library. That's the most important thing about gold open access. It's not the library that's paying for it. It's funders that are paying for it. In some cases, the library pays for it, but it's largely other organizations that are not the library budget are paying for it. And of course, that's moving us towards the funder big deal. It always goes to the big deal. So the funder big deal, of course, will be the next big thing in Gold OA. Freemium is another, and that could mean different things for different products. I know OECD, I saw Toby Green somewhere earlier today, is doing a lot with freemium at OECD, and that's something where whereby users pay for value-added layers. So maybe they can read for free, but they pay to download. Certainly a la carte options if you're primarily a subscription business model. You can look at it, and for a long time publishers have, but they're continuing to look further into a la carte models. And conversely, if you're an a la carte business model, you look at subscription. Traffic referral recommendations. I'll talk just a little bit more about that. Targeted advertising, analytics, and so forth. So we're starting to see a lot more business models in this space. Just a few examples, and there are many more, just a couple. So TrendMD, I saw the TrendMD guys earlier today as well, floating around. So this is a referral product whereby you install little widgets on your content website which refer traffic to other websites, and then you get some revenue for that, and vice versa. A great example from a different space, which I just love, is Shazam. So I don't know if any of you have Shazam on your smartphone. You hold it up, and it tells you what song's playing. Little app. And I just assumed that their business model was they got some kickback from Apple for the iTunes store because they direct you there, and I'm sure they do. But that's actually not where most of their revenue comes from. Most of their revenue, this is fascinating, actually comes from data products, from analytics, which they sell to bands and to record companies about who's listening to what where. So if you're a band and you're going, oh, well, where should we go on tour this summer? Well, they'll tell you where your music is big. And you're going, well, that's where you're going to go, because you go where the fans are. And to record companies, they've got scouts who are trying to figure out what the next big thing is before it breaks. Well, they'll tell you. They'll tell you weeks before things make the radio. And of course, radio stations also want to know what the big. So radio stations, record companies, and bands are paying these guys tons of money to know what the next big thing is. And that's where most of their revenue comes from. So you could imagine, obviously, different industry, but you can imagine products that are based on trying to ferret out what the next big thing is in your space before anybody else knows. Next category here is new product development. And that's everything from, again, data analytics, could be digital workflows, could be author services, point of care, point of practice products. It could be decision support, continuing education, certification test prep, reference discovery, peer review, and so forth. And we're seeing lots of examples here at this conference and elsewhere. Just a few examples. Again, there are dozens more. Sciencescape is a great discovery tool. Helps kind of filter the literature. Kudos, another kind of discovery tool that's more about helping authors and publishers better promote their publications. Pre is a great example of a peer review product based on trying to improve the transparency of peer review. Another great example of American College of Cardiology, they've got a outcomes registry, database of outcomes that they sell to pharmaceutical companies and hospitals, healthcare systems, and so forth. So there are lots of examples out there of associations and publishers and other organizations building these products. And then the last category, which I'll just touch very briefly on because I know David is going to spend a lot more time on this, is mergers and acquisitions. And there are a lot of reasons for mergers and acquisitions, which could be increasing scale, which is probably the most obvious and prevalent. You can think of a lot of the big mergers in our industry over the last years are based on scale, making the big deal bigger, the bigger deal. But there's also purchasing a product or feature to diversify and drive growth. So this is the build buy. Maybe we'll build, maybe we'll buy. Purchasing a product or a smaller company to move faster is another good reason. Diversify. And then on the flip side, of course, is the selling and diversification of assets, which can be used to raise cash or simply because it's not a good fit and it's time to refocus your organization and get rid of what a product or service that just doesn't fit with where you're going now. And these are not things, when we talk about merger and acquisition, this is not something that is limited to large commercial organizations. Mergers and acquisitions can happen at the association level as well. And there's certainly nothing that prevents associations from purchasing some small to mid-size products or service companies. So just to recap, 4 big drivers of growth potentially going forward: reestablishing individual end user market, developing of new business models, new product development, and mergers and acquisitions. And with that, I'll turn things over to Joe, who's going to talk more about the first item on this list.